Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook.
The red light is rolling. Welcome to today's podcast to Sharon Livermore. Sharon, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And I have nothing but full-on apologies for the fact that we're having to re-record this. So for listeners, we've tried this already. We did an amazing interview in person and we had a lovely, lovely conversation over at flagship offices a couple of weeks ago. But for some reason, the tech just didn't work for us, and I'm very, very disappointed. So I've managed to get Sharon online, and here we are to have a conversation. And Sharon, I've just got to extend my apologies for having to re-record. But what do they say? Like the last one was a practice run, and we're gonna smash it this time, right?
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely fine. I love a chat, so it works perfectly.
Awesome. Sharon, I really, really appreciate it. So to bring listeners up to speed, and we're going to record this for both podcasts. So those of you that are listening, this is going to be on the Half Dozen Things podcast, and it's going to be on the Fleet Geeks podcast. And the reason for that is Sharon has got a really, really important message for leaders and managers, regardless of the industry you're in. And I think it's a really, really important message for us to share with people. Now, I met Sharon, just to give you guys the history. Sharon and I met at the Little Miracles networking lunch, and Sharon, who has very humbly not put her MBE title on her name there if you're watching on YouTube, but she is an MBE, and she has received that MBE based on the services in her area of expertise as well. So bit about Sharon then. So she is a business owner. You run a recruitment company called Cameo, and also speak about my language is gone. Domestic abuse.
Domestic abuse, yeah.
I just had a moment then around.
That's what happens when we record sessions in the afternoon, see.
I literally had a moment where I had survivors coming into my head. I had domestic, I had violence. Do you get what I mean? I just couldn't quite get the words out in the right order. But essentially, you're a domestic abuse advocate who speaks about domestic abuse and are a survivor yourself. So Sharon, I'm going to stop waffling and just let you introduce yourself to the listeners, if that's okay. Sorry for like literally garbled afternoon, like mind.
We need more coffee. If anyone's listening, send us coffee for the next one. But no, thank you. It's great to be here. So I am Sharon Livermore. I am a survivor of domestic abuse. I am very, very fortunate to be here. So I nearly lost my life in 2015, which I know we're probably going to touch on. And for me, I realised that work was my only safe space where I was away from my perpetrator. And if my workplace had been educated, there was potentially things that could have happened before I got to the point of leaving the relationship. And that's when obviously things turned for the worse for me. So, yeah, I guess I'm very fortunate to be able to use my voice and educate, as you said before. It doesn't matter what sector somebody's in. It doesn't matter what size of company. It's about creating cultures in workplaces where all genders, people from all different backgrounds, different cultures can be supported if they go through domestic abuse.
Absolutely, Sharon. I massively echo your message. And when we spoke after the networking lunch, it really resonated with me, the work that you're doing. So if you're happy to share, tell me, where do we start? Do we start with your story, or do we start with what you're doing now? I think let's start with the story, Sharon. Let's go with that. So for listeners, let's give them the grounding and the foundations on which the rest of everything is built, really, and the fantastic work that you're doing, Sharon.
Thank you. So I identify as a female. My perpetrator identified as a male. I met him on a sales course initially. I work in recruitment, as you said. So he was the man in the room, walking around, pouring glasses of water, well presented, very, very confident. The things that I'm attracted to in somebody. So we started a relationship, as adults do, And at first it was the tick box of what I guess I was conditioned to believe a good relationship was. There was compliments and flowers and chocolates and, you know, all of those things that made me feel special. We then moved in quite quickly, got engaged, and it was actually on our wedding night that things really changed. So he poured potpourri over my head and said, "How dare you wear that wedding dress?" And I remember thinking at the time, this makes no sense. Like, I felt like a princess on my wedding day. But what it was he'd had or gained in his mind the full power and control of me. So I lived through 18 months of what I would call pure hell, experiencing every form of abuse, apart from economic abuse, to the point where I'd lost my identity. I'd lost my friends, my family, everything about me. I wasn't Sharon anymore. I don't even know who I was. Reached out to my employer at the time and just said, I need help. Fortunately for me, I was able to get that help by going to the police station and trying to get him prosecuted at that point. But it was 2015, so coercive control prosecutions had only just come into force, and I didn't have any physical bruising. So at that point, he got bailed, unfortunately, and I carried on living my life as you would, as best you could. I was going to work. I had my 2 children. So it was just trying to have some kind of routine. And it was about 5 days afterwards, I'd gone to work. I'd gone to put an injunction through during my lunch hour, gone in the evening back to, obviously, to the workplace with my office manager. And then we walked across the car park to go back home that evening. And I remember feeling really tired anyway, because I'd been for court. You know, it had been one of those really stressful days. I'd just come out of an abusive relationship. So we got in our cars as you normally would. And it was November, so it was dark and it was cold. And we got in the cars together and we had an ongoing joke where her car was obviously, well, it was older than mine. So it used to take a lot longer to demist. But that evening, she drove off before me. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, that's a bit strange. But then I thought, no, don't be silly. You know, your emotions are heightened. But I looked behind me, just as you would in like a horror film. And I thought, oh my goodness, thank God he's not sitting there. But then I smelled aftershave. And it was at that point that, I don't know whether it's a sixth sense or a guardian angel or whatever you want to call it, there was something that made me realise that I was in danger. So I put my hand behind me in the footwell of the car and I felt my picnic blanket. I have OCD, so I knew the picnic blanket had been in my boot. So at that point, it's all a bit of a blur, but I got out of the vehicle, walked round and lifted the boot up. And my then husband was in the boot of my car with knives, cable ties, masking tape. He'd loosened the seats, so if I'd have driven off, I wouldn't be here today. But more importantly, well, not more importantly, but he plotted that for 3 days. So he plotted my kidnap and my murder for 3 days. He drove to my house that was around an hour, 45 minutes, an hour away from where my workplace was. He angle grinded through the door to steal my spare car key, and then drove to my place of work, left his car and got into my vehicle. And at no point, this is the bit I don't get myself, at no point was it, this is a really stupid idea to do this. You know, his mission was to take my life and there was nobody that was going to stop him. It was only my sixth sense that saved me in that moment. So I know how fortunate I am to still have a voice. I know that it happens to so many people. And that's why I've chosen to use my voice to educate workplaces and just show that actually it's a process that a workplace can follow that could potentially save someone's life.
Yeah, sure. Sharon, wow. Your story is just like, even like second time of hearing.
I know, I was going to say, your face is like, oh, here's she's going
I know, and then I just, you know, it's like so many questions, and then you just worry about what's appropriate to ask and what's inappropriate.
No, and I think the thing for me is I am happy to answer questions, because I think if it's a question that can help one person that's listening, then I think we should speak about these things. It's not easy, of course it's not. And, you know, there are times when I'm re-triggered, but actually I'm living my best life now. So I want everyone that is going through abuse or has experienced abuse to realise that there is a life after abuse as well.
Sure, yeah. So I think listeners, first of all, I'm going to go on to talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah.
But just to sort of clarify the story. So with what has happened in the past. So you've opened the boot, and I'm guessing like you've then panicked and run, and then it's been the work that has managed to make you safe, because I'm guessing he took chase of you and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I ran at that point, and he did manage to grab hold of me, but I managed to go down and protect myself. But one of my colleagues came out, and two gentlemen from another building came out as well. And at that point, he fled off in the vehicle. If they hadn't have been there, again, I probably would have lost my life in the car park. But fortunately, I did leave on time that day, which was a good thing, because it meant that there was other people around. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I should have either lost my life in the car or in the car park. But work, I think, nobody in the workplace recognized what was going on, and it wasn't through any fault of their own. One, I work in sales, so salespeople are able to mask it a bit better, because that's what we do day in, day out in our jobs. We have to be the smiley person, we have to be on the phone. So I probably did cover it a bit better than other people potentially. But when I'm doing my training, I've actually got a video in one of my training courses of my colleague who sat next to me when I went through it, and she says on there, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know how to have a conversation. Whereas now she's had the training herself, it's completely different. She would ask questions if she went through that again.
Sure, which is amazing, and that's absolutely the purpose of what you're doing now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, with regards like that, so the whole situation was that this all just sort of changed into the relationships. You're actually getting married, and this changed, right? So you had no idea before your wedding day, which is just absolutely incredible.
There was a few signs. I think the thing is, there is a few signs, but I think it depends on your own situation and your scenario in life. I'm somebody that would always look for the best in somebody. So, and also, if you want to believe that this is your fairy tale, you will kind of brush things under the carpet. And you're being conditioned at that time as well. So you don't necessarily put it down to the extremes that someone would go to. And I think that's the thing. It happens. It doesn't happen. It's like one day someone's amazing with you, and the next day someone's turned abusive. It takes time often for that relationship to change.
Sure. Wow. So Sharon, so your husband was then arrested. So what was when we first spoke, Sharon, you mentioned about the way the police sort of handled the whole incident, and that there's potentially, I'm a big advocate for the police anyway, right? And without looking to badmouth them, obviously, there was obviously some learning opportunities, wasn't there, in the way that you were handled? It'd just be really interesting to sort of understand that as well, because that leads into what you're doing now as well, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. So obviously my situation was back in 2015. So there has been a lot of changes already. I'm very fortunate that I get to work with the police now, through using my own lived experience. And I do think they have a really tough time. There are people that come in as new recruits that are expected to understand domestic abuse. It's such a complex issue. And even if you've been in the police or any other area, there's so many different layers. It's a bit like an onion. There's so many different layers of domestic abuse. And what you're dealing with is people that manipulate. So, police are human too. So actually, there are ways that potentially they can be manipulated, and it's understanding the levels of manipulation that happen. So the one thing I would say is, I can't speak for every police force, but Cambridgeshire Police are really making headway in educating as many of their police as they can on deeper levels to be able to understand, I guess, the impact on victims and how they should respond to victims. So it's not in my mind that they're necessarily doing anything wrong. I just think we can always improve. And it is through the experience of people like myself with lived experience that can come in and talk and say, this was good, this potentially could have been done slightly better, maybe think about this. That's what makes a difference. And I'm really proud to work with the police. I think they do an amazing job, and they try, and that's all we can ask. And if they're willing to listen and learn, then that's amazing.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy with expert development for fleet leaders, We offer fully accredited Initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
So we've gone from there. Tell me now about how you came to getting your MBE. So what's changed? What's been going on since then, Sharon?
Yeah, so I was extremely humbled to be given an MBE in the New Year's Honours List for services to victims of domestic abuse. To have my work recognised was incredible, because when you go through something like I did, I do things because I genuinely want to make a difference, whether I'm recognised or not. And to be recognised it was amazing. It has opened up more doors for me over the last few months, well, more than a few months now. We're in October. I don't know where the year's gone, but it's given me a different platform to be able to speak to people in different companies, different organisations, larger companies, to start those conversations. But ultimately, for me, it's about educating and working with all sides of employers, irrelevant of who they are, to make a difference. But yeah, I'm not going to lie, it was amazing. I met Princess Anne, and you know me, I can normally stand up and do talks, and there was me in front of her, and my legs went to jelly, and I was thinking, please don't pass out. Can you imagine? I'd made it into the papers for falling over in front of Princess Anne. But no, it's a huge honour. To be given an MBE is incredible.
Yeah, you should be so proud of yourself. I think it's absolutely incredible. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I think it's very well deserved as well, because I can tell from when we've spoken the effort and time that you've put into supporting others. So tell me a bit about, so people listening will have had some inclination that you do some training and stuff now. So tell people a bit more about the different things you're doing, because you're speaking, you're doing training, you've got policies, those kinds of things. So if you're able to just explain a bit more about the cool work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do guest speaker slots. So that's where I really share my experience, a bit like we've done today, but in more detail, just to bring, I guess, the reality to domestic abuse. So employers will ask me to go and speak if they're launching a policy, for example, and just want to bring it to, basically to real life experience. The other thing I have is training courses. So I have a CPD accredited course on domestic abuse awareness and supporting in the workplace. That one, we tend to see line managers, HR managers, wellbeing leads, directors coming on it, because they get their CPD points in a certificate, although it's open to anybody. And then we also do lunch and learn sessions. Although we call them lunch and learn, I have been known to do them in the middle of the night as well. So they are 24 hours a day to really fit around the workforce, and they work. So ultimately, the CPD course gives more in-depth knowledge on how to respond and refer, whereas the lunch and learns tend to focus more on what is domestic abuse, the fact it impacts everybody. So we talk about the stats around all genders, different communities, etc. And then the signs we're looking out for, and then what is the referral pathway within that organisation. So they kind of work together. And then I've also created a policy which is uniquely named Sharon's Policy, and I always laugh at that because I'm like, it sounds so cheesy, but that was the name that everyone went for. So it is a free template domestic abuse policy and guidance notes that any business of any size can take and amend to work for them. They don't even have to call it a policy, they can just call it guidance, but ultimately it's there to enable businesses to make a difference. And it is such a complex area. The good thing about our policy and guidance is also been legally reviewed, and we do an annual review as well. So anybody who signs up through my website will get an update whenever we do it. So it is working. It's been downloaded from my website now over 185 times, and it just grows by the day from the recognition it's getting. So yeah, it is definitely something that I would encourage listeners to go and have a look at and download.
Wow, Sharon, you're just an inspiration, genuinely. Thank an inspiration for like purpose-driven enterprise, and going out and doing your thing and sharing your story and educating people. So I think it's just amazing. Now, I think a really valuable question at this point, I'm just thinking about what the listeners might be thinking and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they'll understand that you do the training, you do the speaking, and you've got the policy. Now, what would you say to, if I've got a guy that's sitting there thinking, well, this doesn't affect me because I employ guys and domestic abuse doesn't happen to guys. What would you say to that guy to change his mind, Sharon?
I would tell him that 1 in 7 men experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, and that is so underrepresented because it is so much harder for a male to come forward and say that they're experiencing domestic abuse. I think the thing is, it's understanding what domestic abuse is as well, because often people don't see it. They think of the physical side, which is what men tend to think of it more so as, is the physical side. And we don't get physically abused. Some of them do. Absolutely, they do. I've got survivor friends that have been physically abused that are male. But it's the coercive control. It's the economic abuse. You know, you're not allowed to spend your money. Your partner, your wife takes all the money, for example, and you have no say where that money goes. So it might be that you've got a guy that's listening to this that's thinking, well, yeah, my money goes straight into her account and she spends it all and I can't. That's not okay unless it's been agreed and they're both happy with it. So abuse is when you're in a relationship and it's not consensual, it's not agreed. There is no compromise. And it's other things as well. Like if you've got a guy, and this sounds so stereotypical, and I don't mean it to be, but I'm just using an example. If you've got a guy that wants to go to the pub with his friends, for example, and his partner's saying, I don't want you going to the pub, not because he's got to be at home to look after the children because she's going to work, but it's because she's saying, I don't want you going because I don't trust you. That's not okay. That isn't okay. That's coercive control. You're controlling someone else's life because of their own insecurities, and that's not right. So, they're just 2 examples, but there's so many different examples. And I think until men start speaking about it, we need to give men a safe space as well. And it is okay to say I'm being abused as a male, or any gender, every gender experiences abuse.
Yeah, sure. So Sharon, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because on the one thing is that it's really common, and much more common than people think. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men.
1 in 7 men, like that, yeah. And then one man also loses his life every 4 weeks, and 1 woman every 5 days. So if we're looking at that, they're big stats.
Huge stats. It's an incredibly big issue, and also it's a very complex issue, like you say. So it can come down to money control. It can come down to social control. Lots of different aspects to it. So I think hopefully that will have changed the mind of someone listening who's maybe a little bit skeptical about whether it applies to them, because this is something that all workplaces could benefit from, the training and awareness of which you provide, don't they? So there's a range of options by the sounds of it. You've got a CPD course, you've got lunch and learns, you've got speaking slots, and you'll adapt that content dependent on the organization. So if an organization's thinking, I'm not sure how that'll work for me, definitely have that conversation, because you'll just make it work for them, won't you? You'll just adapt it.
Absolutely. We adapt things all the time. I was with the Royal Mail through their union, the Communications Workers Union, and they could only give me 30 minutes for their timings. So I created a 30-minute presentation, and it was, without sounding wrong, it was very male focused on the employees. I did the night shift, and actually, when people walked out of there, they were saying thank you, and oh my goodness, I hadn't thought of that. And they, when they came in, there was a few like, oh, we're in a domestic abuse presentation here. But by the end of it, they were all felt empowered, and they were all saying thank you. And I felt that they really took something away from it. So I do understand there are challenges when you are presenting to a more male-focused group. I've worked with construction companies. I used to work in construction myself, so was very much in a male-focused environment. But it is about adapting my approach as well. And it is, I think the good thing about our sessions that we deliver is they are fully inclusive. We do talk about stats of how it impacts everybody. So nobody in that room sits there and thinks, well, I've not been included in this. And I think that's what we need to do. And the whole process with this is creating a culture where everybody is valued and everybody can come forward and ask for help if they need it.
Amazing. Sharon, I think it's just incredible work that you're doing. And I think if people are listening, I encourage them to arrange for you to come in and speak to their teams of people, even if it's only the key stakeholders. But overall, it's a lot like, I see this a lot like mental health awareness, that the level of awareness, the more people we can raise the levels of awareness of, the better the workplace the culture is going to be. It's such a common issue. And the thing is this training is, you know, even if it's not directly impacting the workplace, the people who are getting the learning have sisters and wives and daughters and mums, and you know, and it just sort of society as a whole will benefit off of that.
And I think the good thing as well is it does have an impact on productivity, absenteeism. So there is a cost as well. So I often get asked, well, why should we do this? I'd like to think that people will do it for well-being. But if you're looking at the cost, the average cost is £7,245 per survivor on lost output for an employer. So if you look at it like that, if you're even if you're a small organization, if you're a large organization, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, £7,245, it makes sense to do it financially as well. So there are reasons. Obviously, for me, it's about well-being, but I do appreciate that businesses have costs too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharon, you're an absolute star, and I'm so pleased that you came back on the podcast to have another go at the recording. And we still had tech issues, but I'm just going to be pleased once Harry's edited it and it's all worked out fine. Even this is a dedication Sharon has. We got on the call and you were due to pick your son up, and you've arranged for alternative transport as well. So you're just you're just so committed to it.
I wasn't going to miss this. I was like, we need to get this done. As long as we don't sound like robots on it, we've done something right.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sharon, it's been a real pleasure. I've got links to share in the show notes for you for the policy and for your website and for how to get in touch with you and your LinkedIn. So all it leaves for me to say is to encourage, if you're listening to this and you haven't gone through the process of having someone come in and share information around domestic abuse, do get in touch with Sharon, do download that policy, introduce it in your workplace, and let's raise the levels of awareness, because 1 in 4 and 1 in 7 are big numbers, and obviously those death rates are huge as well. So it's a major issue that really we can all do our little bit to benefit, and obviously Sharon's doing a huge bit, but it's just down to the rest of us to do our bit as well, I think. So absolutely. Sharon, it's been a pleasure having you back on the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Appreciate it. And listeners, thanks for listening, and I will see you all on a future podcast. So thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.